So we're going to go ahead and get started. As usual, the hum in the room is really wonderful to hear. We love to hear people who are sharing their lives from the last week to this week. And glad that you all could make it. Hope that you enjoyed the food samples. I think that you were told that Christine has kind of adapted that original recipe to add a little bit more spice in it, a little bit more tuna flavor, a little bit more capers and other kinds of things that can be added to it. And you can make this so that your taste buds like it as opposed to somebody else's taste buds. So is there anybody who has any questions or any thoughts about what's been going on to this point? You're coming to several classes so far. We had some food samples last time. Anybody? I'm sure there's a couple of you. One of you has said, I don't want to be here. I don't really want to hear this, but I want to hear it. It's like, and so we really understand that concept because I was exactly like that myself. I did not want to change what I was doing. And yet we're trying to make it fun for you and interesting, and change is difficult for all of us, but we're glad that you could all make it. And we're lucky to have Scott Wagnon tonight, who's going to spend time on teaching you about how to eat. I'm going to share with you various things. I'm going to let him do it. I don't know if we have any announcements. Yes. Come up front, Pam. Announcements. One announcement is Walk with a Doc is every Saturday. And
I'm going to be speaking next week about sleep and connection, a lot about connection, and a lot about that I speak about his connection is connecting with animals. And as many of you know, I work at a farm sanctuary, and we're organizing a visit for people to come down to Welcome Home Farm Sanctuary and have a visit and give the animals treats. This month, either the 22nd or the 29th. I haven't been able to get firm that with Misty. I will tomorrow. And so I'll have it for the newsletter. And so come down on a Wednesday morning we're usually done cleaning about 11, and come down and meet all the animals and give them treats. It's the best thing ever to feed a 6,000-pound cow a banana. You get slime all over your hands. And then we have a little pig, Bella. I'll show you pictures next week, who's actually a dwarf pig, a little tiny thing. And we now have, we don't know what he is, a very, very tiny sheep. He's named Solace, and there's a wonderful story about him that he's probably, we thought he was a lamb, but then the vet came and said, wait a minute, these are adult teeth. So we think he's some sort of another little midget. So anyway, they're very cool. So the 22nd or to the 29th, put that on your calendar, and we'll try to arrange rides for people. So.
Thank you. And how many of you made it to the picnic yesterday? Wow, about half of you. For those of you who didn't make it to that fun event, next year, put it on your calendar. Come, it's really a fun event, and we look forward to seeing you all again. Scott?
Right. Yeah, and we have potluck at the end of each class cycle too. It just happened to be the one that ends right before summer. We just kind of coincided with the picnic that's in June. Although JJ was talking about how we might make it again, maybe make it the weekend of after 4th of July, just because it almost seemed like there was more people that could make it than couldn't make it, because a lot of people just stay in town and just do stuff. So we can check it out, just because the weather wasn't so good the weekend before. What a difference a week made there. So we haven't nailed down the date for next year yet, but it's usually this was our 5th year we've done it with Eugene Veggies, and it's always been like the last Saturday or Sunday in June usually. But yeah, this worked out pretty well on July 5th. And then, yeah, so at the end of this class cycle, then in September, it'll be like mid-September when we're done with this class cycle, we'll definitely schedule a potluck here. We've always done that in the past, like at the end of the class cycle, we'll get together, have a potluck here. So that'll probably be in October or something, maybe early mid-October. So that'll be the next potluck. So stay tuned for that. And does everybody have one of these handouts? Anyone that didn't get one yet? All right. I got more up here. Just one, or is there anyone else? All right. So I'm going to go over this basic sheet on food label reading, kind of gives you the key things you need to know. And then after I go through this handout, kind of like if you guys were here for the food preparation and planning, where I went over the website, all the different resources, I'll go over, there's some additional food label reading educational resources on the website. So I'll have Ed pull those up when we're done with this handout, and I'll show you that, because there's actually, courtesy of Debbie, who has done this class in the past a couple of times, there's a worksheet on there that's posted. And so what it is it's just basically you just pick any food label from your home and you can practice. So we'll go over the key things you need to learn on this sheet here tonight. And then when you get home or tomorrow or whenever you have time, go to the website, livelifestylemedicine.com, and click on, you'll see, I'll show you where it's at, the worksheet, and you can print it out if you have a printer, or you can just, freehand it by looking at it on the computer, and it just shows you, okay, what's all the things you learned here on that particular food label. So you can do that. And then this won't take super long, so we'll have time for questions, and we can do whatever you guys want to do, but we could definitely get out earlier tonight if no one has anything to extend the time, we can certainly leave early. So first thing I want to mention about food labels, what do you think the number one rule is to reading food labels? What do you think is the number one thing? Serving size, what else? Anything else? First ingredient, those are all great. This is a little bit of a trick question. so anything else come to mind? We'll go over this. That you should read them. Yeah, that's a good one. That's almost there. How about, well, if it has a label, maybe we should need it, right? For the most part. So for the vast majority of, if you looked at, all those pictures of all the delicious food that Charlie had on there, there wasn't a food label on any of that food. Yeah, because I don't think they even use canned beans. But I eat canned beans, so so you need to. There are times when you need to read a food label, even like frozen vegetables, because it can be tricky. Frozen vegetables usually aren't tricky because it usually just says Brussels sprouts and it's just a bag of frozen Brussels sprouts. But some of the convenience foods, like you might see lentil quinoa bowl at Costco, for example. Well, you need to learn how to read a food label there, because when you look at the ingredients, you'll notice they add a bunch of stuff to it, oil and salt and things like that, right? So you need to have this skill, but the number one rule of food label reading is for the most part, try to eat foods that don't have a food label. But again, there are exceptions to that. So yeah, that's the number one rule. And then so you can see on here the little tab, and on the back you can read through this. We won't spend a lot of time on it, but understanding the ingredients, carbohydrates, sugars, oil, and then some general tips on there. And I got this handout from way back in 2018 to 2020 when I was teaching the classes here. Thomas Bosch, who's a dietitian here in the area, he's right up there. He got this from UC Davis because he's a dietitian, and he got this from UC Davis. But one thing that was interesting when I read the fine print here on the back, if you look down, adapted from Should I Eat That? How to Choose the Healthiest Foods by Jeff Novick, who's a dietitian. And when I do the weight management calorie density class, you'll be seeing a lot of Jeff Novick. So he used to work for the McDougall program. He's one of my favorite dietitians. So actually, I never did notice that before on this handout, that he's actually adapted from him. So you'll see more about Jeff Novick soon. Okay, so basically, once you guys in the back said, yeah, you want to look at the ingredients list and things, and that's good. So it doesn't show it as one of the tabs here on the right hand side. but when you're reading a label, you want to, hopefully it doesn't have a whole lot of ingredients. So if you flip it over and look at the back, and you'll see a whole list of ingredients, and hopefully they're things you can recognize, because kind of what we call process difference between processed food and ultra processed food is like processed food is something that, yeah, you still recognize the names of what's on the ingredients list, and you could technically make it in your kitchen. You could go buy the ingredients, you could make it in your kitchen technically, and that would be kind of what we call a minimally processed or mildly processed food. Now, ultra processed foods, usually on the other hand, are, you look at the ingredients list and it looks like a chemistry set, right? It's all these long names, chemicals, things you don't recognize at all. You couldn't make that in your kitchen. So like if you took a Twinkie and looked at the package on a Twinkie, there's no way you could make that exact thing in your kitchen. Yeah, you could from scratch. You could probably figure out how to make, from old Betty Crocker recipe or something. Flour and sugar and shortening, and you could probably figure out kind of how to do it. But as far as looking at that ingredients list and copying that, and a lot of those extra ingredients are to extend the shelf life. So because if you made a homemade Twinkie and put it in and wrapped it up in plastic and put it on a shelf, it would be bad like 2 or 3 days later. And so that's not not a good return on investment if you're you want to be able to put it on the shelf for 6 months or a year and you could still eat it, right? So that's kind of the purpose of ultra processing food. And if you think about it, back in as a lot of that started around just after World War II. Did you ever hear of the K rations? So that kind of started because what they were trying to figure out is, well, we got to get to the soldiers overseas. We need to get them calories. We got to get them food that's easily packaged, easily transported, easy to distribute, and gives them good calories. And so the intention was always good. It's like, yeah, we just got to get calories, convenience. And then after World War II, and it was basically people were back to work, and it became more of a convenience thing. So you started processing more foods, TV dinners, things started kind of becoming more packaged and processed because convenience, and this is what people want, and people don't have time to cook and things like that. So that's kind of the origin of kind of how processed foods came to be. But maybe 75, 100 years ago, we didn't need to really have this skill because things were pretty much just cooked at home, and there wasn't a lot of packaged processed foods. Yeah, there was sugar and flour and things like that, but you didn't have Oreo cookies with 50 ingredients on it or something like that on a shelf for a year, and it was still good. That you just didn't see that 100 years ago. So now we have to have this particular skill. And so the other thing that's not on here, and it's on some of the other handouts I'll show you on the website, is besides the ingredients list, is just not believing whatever it says on the front of the package. So when you look at a front of a package and it says low fat, or it says with protein, or zero added sugar, or things like that, those are sometimes a little bit like a half truth, but a lot of times it's just totally false. It's just trying to get you to draw your eyes to it, and you have to still look at that ingredients list and look and use these skills to kind of decide whether this is something you should eat or not. So yeah, never believe what's on the front of the package. That's just a marketing thing. So that's number one. Besides not eating foods with food labels, next would be don't believe anything on the front of the package, and then looking at that ingredients list, which we went over as far as however many ingredients it has. Now let's start with the top tab on the right here. It says fat, less than 20% of calories per serving. And this is another thing you can get tricked on, because it'll say, oh, it's only got this, percent of fat and this many grams of fat. And that can be misleading, because a lot of times what they do is they say it's basically the grams of fat by volume. And so there'll be like a number of servings that are in a package, and it's by weight instead of percent of calories is what's actually more important. But a lot of times it'll look like a low fat food, because it'll say it's 97% fat free, for example. You'll see that on a front of a label. Oh, 97% fat free. So you're thinking it's only 3% fat, and you look at this 20% rule, and that's completely not what it is. That's completely false advertising, because it's based on fat by weight. And so what's really important is the percent of calories that are from fat is what's most important, because we actually eat calories. And because a lot of times they can add water to something and that'll increase the weight but decrease the amount of fat in a product. You remember the old Snackwell cookies back in the 80s? Everyone was like low fat, and so just started eating more and more of these fat-free products. I remember that back in those days, because we can lose weight by cutting fat, and so let's look for foods that are fat-free or really low in fat, and that's what everybody did. But what they did is they either added water or they added sugar. And by adding sugar, that lowers the percent of the calories that come from fat. And so, but it still has just as much. A lot of times, it still has just as much fat as it did before. But they added so much sugar that it makes it look like it's healthier, but it's really not. And so that's another trick. And some of the other handouts I'll show you how it goes a little more in depth on this. And so how we do this percent of calories from fat per serving is, if you look off to the left there on this actual food label, it says total grams of fat is only 1. And so this actually will actually show it to you, calories from fat 25 and calories per serving is 270. And so let's see, I guess this is not really a complete product here. It's just kind of giving you examples of that. But what I want to instill in you is that you'll look at the number of calories that are in a serving, and because it's really important to know per serving, because then you look at the serving size. Someone else mentioned serving size here as being important, is that you have to figure out how many servings you're going to eat. So if you look at the package, you go, well, I usually eat half this package when I eat it. And so then how many servings is that? And the serving sizes are always really super small, like unrealistically small. And so it's like, what, this is supposed to be, 4 servings. It's like I eat the whole thing easy, right? It's like, so you have to multiply everything by 4 to actually reflect what you actually ate. And so they do that also on purpose by having really ridiculously small serving sizes. It makes it look healthier. It makes it look like, well, it's only this many calories from fat. It's only this much sugar. It's actually this much fiber or whatever. It looks better than it is a lot of times because the serving sizes are so small. And so I'm not going to even go over the old food label, because I have another handout on the website that kind of goes over old new food labels and new food labels. And it's pretty dated now. I think it was 2017 when they switched from the old food label to the new food label. And one of the bummers or downsides to the new food label, the one we're dealing with now, is they don't tell you how many calories are from fat anymore. And so it was one of the concessions that we were upset about when they made that change. One of the concessions they made that was a positive thing was they actually had to write how many grams of added sugar there was that has been added to it. So there's natural sugar and things, and so it made it look healthier, but then they would add sugar and they wouldn't have to report that, but now they have to report however many grams of added sugar. So that's a good thing. But then the bad thing was that they didn't have to report how many calories in a serving are from fat. And so they have to give you the grams of fat. Yeah, so we're getting to that. So you have to do math. Yeah, so something I don't know if you guys have pens, but you can just remember that there's 9 calories in every gram of fat. So protein has 4 calories per gram, and carbohydrate has 4 calories per gram, and fat has 9 calories per gram. So the only thing you have to remember right now with the food label reading is 9 calories in every gram of fat. And so if something has 8 grams of fat in a serving, how many calories in fat would that be? So 9 calories, there's 8 grams of fat. So 9 times 8, 72, right? So in that example, there would be 72 calories that come from fat in whatever that is. And so then all you have to do is, I don't have my calculator, if Charlie wants to do, or someone wants to do, here's an example on this label here. There's 270 calories in a serving in this label on the left, and then 25 are from fat. So you would just take 270 divided by 25, and that would give you the percent of calories from fat. So what's 270 divided by 25? It's about, what is that? 10.8. So it's actually only 10.8% fat. So that beats the 20% rule. And the 20% rule, it's kind of designed, that's kind of the general consensus that, what we would consider a low fat diet would be less than 20% of your calories from fat. Most Americans are getting 30 to 40%. People on ketogenic low carb diets are often getting 60, 70% of their calories from fat. And so that's a lot, right? And so the lower the better. But people say, well, we need some fat? Well, it's like, well, yeah, we do. Even broccoli has fat. Even avocado has a lot of fat. Nuts have a lot of fat. So every plant has fat in it. And so there's no such thing as a no fat diet. There's if you're eating 100% whole food plant-based diet, you're probably getting somewhere between 10 and 15% of your calories from fat. And so this kind of helps you to go, okay, well, if this product is more than 20% of the calories from fat, I probably shouldn't eat it. Of course, there's exceptions as far as like if you're eating an avocado, it's like 60 or 70% fat. Nuts are close to 60, 70% fat. But as long as you're only eating a small handful a day, like Dr. Rigger says, or quarter of a avocado, and you're not necessarily trying to lose weight, you could go overboard on the plant fats too. So, and then that oil is just 100% fat, right? It's just, that's all it is. Any kind of oil is just fat. And so, yeah. Yeah, I don't know if this is not the same. It's just giving you examples. And so, because if it was 1 gram of fat, it would only be 9 calories from fat. So I don't think this is really any particular item. It's just kind of pointing out what each of these things, where to look on the food label for these different things. And on the, yeah, if you just pick up any actual food label, you can easily do this. So you'll get the grams of fat. And then of course you don't want it, we want to avoid saturated fat because that's going to be from an animal or from a tropical oil. So like palm kernel oil, coconut oil, nuts do have a little bit of saturated fat. Seeds have a little bit of saturated fat, but very small amounts. But you're trying to avoid, saturated fat, especially because most of the fat in the plants is unsaturated, the poly and monounsaturated, the little healthier versions. Remember from the class we talked about even in the introduction about how, is a food healthy? Well, compared to what, so yeah, an avocado is healthy compared to bacon and sausage, but not as healthy as eating broccoli or tofu or some of those kinds of things because it's because it has a little bit extra fat in it. So even though it's a healthy fat, so the 20% rule is really mostly if you're trying to lose weight or maintain or lose weight, you want to try to keep it under 20%. And again, this is when you're looking at labels. And so, if you're going to put an avocado on your bean and rice bowl, you don't need a label for that. You tend to know, okay, this is a lot of fat. It's healthy fat, but I don't, want to go overboard on it, especially if you're trying to lose weight. So that's any questions about the 20% rule? And all you got to remember is the 9 calories per gram. So you just take however many calories. So you take however many grams of fat there are in a particular serving, and then you multiply that by 9, and then you basically take the calories in the serving, divide that by however many calories there are of fat, and then that'll give you that percentage number. So just the calories divided by the calories from fat will give you the percent of calories from fat per serving. So that's important to know, because then it almost doesn't even matter how many servings you eat. It's going to be less than 20% of the calories. But obviously you're going to eat more calories if you eat more servings. So we know that, but and we'll go more in depth on that on the calorie density class. And then this no trans fat, the next little tab on the left there below the fat, that's a little bit outdated too, because we don't really, essentially the trans fats have been outlawed from the food supply. So because they were so bad, worse than saturated fat and causing heart disease and strokes and stuff. So that's your like hydrogenated oils, essentially like Crisco, like back in the day when you used to cook with Crisco. That's trans fat, hydrogenated oil. And so it's really bad. And so it was so bad they outlawed it in the food supply. So the only way you get trans fat now is there's some naturally occurring trans fats in animals. So like so cows, pigs, if you're eating animals, you're going to be getting a little bit of the natural trans fats that they contain. And then next one over to the right, zero cholesterol. So what do we know about cholesterol? Where does it come from? Animals. Yeah, from bodies. Animals. Yeah. So So we make all the cholesterol we need in our liver, so we don't need to consume any. And so if something has cholesterol in it, then you know it came from an animal, because that's the only place it comes from. So it's you eat the, because we don't, unless we eat or eat a human. So eat a human liver, you would get cholesterol. So yeah, that's only comes from animals. And then so that those are two are pretty easy. Then sodium, this is a big one. So what is sodium is, sodium chloride. We think of table salt, right? So is anyone confused about sodium? I mean, I know we talk about it. We use those words interchangeably. Sodium chloride, table salt, sodium. It's just there's a certain amount of sodium and a certain amount of table salt and all that. But when you're looking at a food label, they always just reported it as milligrams of sodium. So how much sodium, does anyone know how much sodium or we're trying to limit ourselves to? Like there's different guidelines. There's basically what the recommended dietary allowance is. There's the amount that the American Heart Association recommends staying under, American College of Cardiology, because sodium is actually one of the number one causes of diet-related death on the planet is actually too much sodium. So does anyone know kind of what the RDA is for sodium? Any guess? So 1500. So 1500 is for what the American College of Cardiology and the American Heart Association want people to be under. But the RDA is more or less 2,300 milligrams, so a little bit higher, 23 to 2,400 milligrams. And when I go over the 1-to-1 rule here in a minute, that's where that came from, is from the number of milligrams of sodium equal to the number of calories most people eat. And so I'll get to that in a second. But so 2,300 milligrams, you don't want to go over that. Most Americans are getting 3,000 milligrams or more, sometimes much more than that. And so kind of keep that in mind when you're thinking about these numbers. But yeah, under 1,500 is better. And actually, they did studies. Dr. Greger even has some videos on nutritionfacts.org that talks about some tribes in Africa where they've actually looked at how much sodium they're getting in their diet, and they aren't vegan. They're eating some animals, but they're eating mostly roots and tubers and berries and some animals, and they're only getting between 200 and 400 milligrams of sodium in a day. And so we know, and they're thriving. So we know that's all we really need from a mineral standpoint. We have to have certain amount of minerals, and sodium is one of the minerals in the soil, and we need a certain amount. But even as low as 200 to 400 milligrams is totally fine. But nobody's getting any of that. Well, iodine is a whole nother topic. It's you need 150 micrograms a day. That's the RDA, but you get that, so you can get that from iodized salt. So it's a good segue there. So if you're not eating dairy products, which dairy products contain iodine because they use iodine cleaners to clean the teats, the udders, and so some of the iodine gets into the milk, and so that's how dairy products have iodine in them. Some processed foods fortify with iodine, and then the other ways you can get it is from like the sea vegetables, like the dulse and the nori and wakame and those things, but fish itself also has iodine, because the original source of iodine in the ocean is actually from the algae, and so the sea vegetables. And so the smaller fish eat the algae, the bigger fish eat the smaller fish, and it concentrates up the food chain. So you get iodine by eating fish as well. And so for me, for example, I'm pretty salt sensitive, so I don't salt my food. If I was to salt my food, I would recommend iodized salt, just because then you're getting that extra iodine. Because a lot of people do the sea salt, the Himalayan salt, those kinds of things, and it's not usually fortified with iodine. And so so it's best to get your iodine from either a supplement. Like I take a supplement because I don't eat a lot of the sea vegetables as much as I probably should, and then I don't use iodized salt because I am super salt sensitive, and so I choose to take an iodine supplement. So, but that's a good kind of bridge from sodium and iodine because of the iodized salt. So, so the sodium, the 1-to-1 rule, what that is when you look at a food label, you want the milligrams of sodium per serving to be about the same as the number of calories per serving. So that's the 1-to-1. And so if something has 300 calories per serving, you want there to be 300 milligrams of sodium or less. So less is even better. And so for example, if you look at like Campbell's chicken noodle soup, it's like something like 900, I think it's like 900 milligrams of sodium per serving, and there's only like 70 calories in a serving. And so, if you ate that whole can of chicken noodle soup, you're getting probably, 2 to 3 grams of sodium and already. So you already got your whole daily allotment in one can of soup, if not more, actually. And so that's an example of a really extremely salty food. And so 1 to 1. So sodium to be less than or equal to the number of calories per serving. And where they came up with that is, I kind of alluded to it earlier, is that if you're eating, most people eat about, they take the average person, average weight person, how much they're eating. It's usually between 2,000 and 2,300 calories per day. That's what the average small, like adult female would eat. There's always going to vary based on muscle mass, body size, activity level, things like that. But kind of the average person eats about between 2,500 calories a day, somewhere around there. And so if you happen to be eating all processed foods, which we wouldn't recommend, if you kept it at the 1 to 1 rule, you'd be staying under that 2,300 milligrams, right? The RDA, just like we talked about. So that's kind of where that number came from. But studies show that less sodium than that, it's actually better. Especially under 1,500 milligrams. If you have heart failure, have kidney trouble and things like that, you actually want less than that. And so that's where the sodium rule is helpful. So you look at things like bread, chips, cookies, things like that, tons of sodium. So you look at the number of milligrams per serving and the number of milligrams of sodium per serving, and you want those to be about equal or less sodium. Yeah. The recommended, yeah, the RDA, the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, basically, yeah, in the back. There are trace amounts, like, because it's really higher in sea plants, but iodine, there's some naturally occurring iodine in the soil, and so you probably get trace amounts in plants, but not a reliable enough source. And so I would just recommend, if you want to get it, get it from, if you're going to do a little bit of salt on your food at the table, which is the better place to add the salt, would be at the dinner table, because if you cook with it, it takes a lot more salt to make something taste salty than if you just put a tiny little pinch on the food at the plate, because it's on the surface of the food and it really hits the tongue. And so if you're not going to do dairy products and you're avoiding fish, for example, then I'd recommend, if you are using salt, use a little bit of iodized salt. Then you get it there, or go ahead and get some of the iodine from the sea vegetables, which is where the fish got it. It's just like that's where the fish got the omega-3. That's where the fish got all the pollutants and things, is from it gets bioamplified up the food chain, whether it's a mineral or fat or contaminants like methylmercury, microplastics, dioxins, things like that. So, and then also our protein, we get all our protein from plants. Like the cow got all its protein from eating plants. And so then you eat the animal, you're getting the protein that it got from the plants. You can get it from the original source too. So, so I'd recommend, sea vegetables, and then iodized salt if you're going to use any salt. And then if you're like me and don't do enough of either of those, then take the supplement. Mine's made from kelp granules, and you have to be careful with natural kelp. It's too high in iodine, so you could actually get into trouble with a goiter, suppress your thyroid because you can actually suppress your thyroid and get a goiter if you eat too much iodine or too little iodine. So there's a right amount. Which is why 150 micrograms is the recommended dietary allowance for a day for iodine. So any questions about sodium? The 1 to 1 rule. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So the question is, if you're out in the sun sweating a lot, is it okay to have a little bit more sodium? And the answer is yes. And so sodium is one of the few minerals that we actually will crave when we're a little bit low. So if you were out all day in the sun and you sweat tons and you drank tons of plain water, for example, and you know how sometimes in the summer when you're really hot and you're busy and you're drinking lots of water, you don't feel that hungry. That's a lot of reason a lot of us lose a few pounds in the summers, because one, we're more active, and two, you're outside, you're running around doing this and that, and it's light for so many more hours. You tend to not eat as much. People tend to eat less in the summertime because it's so much more light and we're just out and about doing stuff. And so if you got into that situation where you hardly didn't eat very much food and you drank tons of plain water and you sweat a lot, you will tend to actually crave salty food like chips and things like that, because your body knows when it's getting a little low and it'll actually crave that. The only kind of one of the other cravings is actually iron. So you've ever heard of kids eating dirt and things like that? It's called pica. So you'll actually chew on a clay pot, or you'll put dirt in your mouth. Kids will do that, and adults have been shown to do that, have that kind of behavior when they're iron deficient. You actually crave iron. You actually crave because there's iron in soil, right? And so that's actually a thing. So that's one of the things about sodium. Don't pee. I don't know. I don't know if it's water soluble or not. I'd have to look it up. I don't know what you do with excess iodine. Yeah, because I know it can suppress the thyroid. It goes to your thyroid gland. Yeah, which is why radiation, like if Chernobyl blew up, or whatever, people would take iodine tablets, because it actually suppresses the uptake of radioactivity into your thyroid gland, so you're less likely to get thyroid cancer. But I'd have to look it up. Yeah, Charlie will look it up. I don't know, but yeah. So we got sodium down. So we got fat, we got sodium, and then carbohydrates is the next one. And there's a little paragraph in the back on trying to avoid refined carbohydrates. And when we talk about the nutritional myths class, we will go over a lot of this stuff in more detail and talk a lot about that. But so when you look at carbohydrates, when you look at the ingredients list, you want to look for something that says whole grain. So you don't want refined. Sometimes it'll say enriched wheat flour, bleached flour, all-purpose flour. You want whole grains on the ingredients list, so they want it to say whole. So whole or rolled or stone ground. So whole grain is always a good sign. And then, well, whole, but the word whole implies that it is the whole wheat, as far as it's still got a lot of the fiber left in it. And the other way you look at it is when you actually look at the grams of fiber. And that's another one further down. We'll get to that in a minute. Grams of fiber per serving. That's all, but I'll jump to that because it's related to the carbohydrates. So when you look for the words whole, that's the key point when you look at the ingredients list. And then you look at the number of grams of fiber per serving. And if it's at least 2 to 3, that's usually a good sign that it's made with a whole grain, and mostly whole grain, because sometimes they'll mix together whole grains with more refined grains just for more shelf life. No, whole grain is a whole wheat. Whole wheat is a whole grain. It's all the same, yeah. So the question is there a difference between whole wheat and whole grain? They're both whole grain. Whole grain. Whole wheat is a whole grain. So you want that word whole is what's important there. And then the number of grams of fiber per serving. There's also another rule if you really want to be strict. It's not on here. It's called the 5-to-1 rule. And what that is when you look at the number of carbohydrates per serving on a food label, like this one here says total carbohydrate 43 grams per serving. And then it says actually dietary fiber is 6. And so the 5-to-1 rule is you'd want only no more than 5 times the number of carbohydrates than the grams of fiber. So let's do it for this one. So what's 43 divided by 6? That would be what, 7? Right. So 7-to-1, that would be a 7-to-1 rule, which isn't too bad. I know I think I looked at a box of grape nuts not long ago and it was like 7-to-1. So it's not too terribly bad. 5-to-1's better, but like Ezekiel bread, I think it's 5-to-1. I think there's a couple, I can't remember the name of that cereal. Dave's Killer Bread's pretty close. One of them, the Good Seed or something, but you can find some packaged products that meet the 5-to-1 rule, but it's really difficult. So as close to that as you can get, and that's why that 2 to 3 grams per fiber per serving is also a relatively good rule. But trying to get it as close to 5-to-1. So all you really would have to do is go, okay, how many grams of fiber in a serving of this product I'm looking at, and if it says, let's say it says 5. So you go, okay, so I want the total carbohydrate per serving not to be any more than 25, right? Because that would be 5 times 5, 25, so 5-to-1. So you only want it to be 5 times more total carbohydrate than fiber. And that just gives you a sign that, this is pretty whole grain. This is pretty robust product here. And because the incentive for, again, like we talked about earlier, the incentive to have less fiber, have less whole grain, less whole grains in a product is it shortens the shelf life again. because things start to go rancid. Things, just aren't going to last as long. They're going to mold. Like you see a bread that's a really healthy bread, a lot of times it'll get moldy within a week, right? Whereas if you get a bread that's got a lot more refined grains and things in it, added sugar and oils and stuff like that, the chemistry set on the ingredients list, that'll last in your bread box for weeks, right? And it's still fine, right? And so that's usually a sign that it's more processed and has had a lot of the natural whole grains and foods removed from it. And then, okay, so any questions about the grams of fiber, the carbohydrate? Yeah, in the back. Yeah, right. Correct. That's exactly right. Yep. Yeah, that's great. So yeah, 43 divided by 6 is about 7. So it's about a 7-to-1 ratio of carbohydrate to fiber, which is still pretty good. Um, so it's, I think, and then one thing to mention with this, because this only really applies to a processed food, really only applies to a food that's got a food label on it. So if you were to look up the nutrition uh, information on like a potato or something, like actually a whole food, like a black bean or a potato or a carrot or something like that, it would actually, you would go, oh, that doesn't meet the 5-to-1 rule, or it only has this much fiber. It's like, oh, my chips were better, or my my bread was better. It's like, no, that rule, those rules don't apply to a whole food. It's just to something that's been processed, because you know what that is. You know how many. You can look up the nutrition information. It's got this many grams of fiber. It's got this much of all these different nutrients, this much protein, and it's going to have all the vitamins and minerals. It's a whole food. It's going to also, it's going to digest in your body completely different than a processed food. So like an example would be, I might have mentioned this to you guys this before, that like let's say you take oat, or let's say you take wheat berries. So wheat berries are just the the whole wheat berry that comes off the plant in the field, right? And if you were to boil those up and herbs and spices and add some vegetables with it to make it taste good, all that, and you ate that with that meal you just ate, that was the completely intact whole grain, and that's going to digest in your body really slowly. Your blood sugar is going to go up very slowly. It's kind of like throwing a block of ice out on your front lawn on a hot summer day. It's going to melt slowly, right? Because it's its whole food. It's going to have to be broken down. It's going to make it down to your colon, like Charlie talks about, the L cells, and it's not going to get absorbed high up. It's going to be way down. So that's like your block of ice out on the front lawn on a hot summer day. Whereas if you take that same wheat berry and you mill it into flour, even if it's whole grain flour, and it's whole, it's still got some fiber in it, but because you changed the surface area of it, it's no longer a whole food anymore. It's now a processed food. And you made it into bread, for example. That bread's still whole grain. It's still fairly healthy. But what's going to happen where's that going to get digested? Higher up, right? Up in your stomach and your small intestine. And so now what that's like taking shaved ice and spreading a bunch of shaved ice on your front lawn on a hot summer day. It's going to melt fast, right? So that melts fast, whereas the whole wheat berry melts slow. And so that you just increase that surface area, it's going to melt fast. It's going to spike your blood sugar much faster. And so if you're trying to make your colon feed your gut bacteria, make you feel full and satisfied on less calories, and yet still get to feel full and satisfied, you want that whole intact food, not the more processed, even though it's a whole grain. So that's just an example of kind of how two foods can be completely different. And I just wanted to mention that because when it comes to the food label reading, the wheat berry wouldn't count for like figuring out the 5-to-1 and all these different things, but the bread, that because it's been processed, that's when you want to apply these food label rules, is to foods that have been manipulated in some way. They had something removed or something added, and that's where these skills come in really handy. So any other questions on what we've covered so far? All right, well, next is avoiding added sugar. So again, I mentioned earlier that the new food label, they have to add that in now. And so it's always good to look at that. So it's just going to add calories to it, and it's just all processed, right? So you want to avoid things that have added sugar. It's always a good rule. We talked about the fiber rule, and then the no added oil is also good to look at, because you of course you want to make sure the type of oil makes a difference. So, it's still 9 calories per gram. Every fat has 9 calories per gram, whether it's a healthier unsaturated polyunsaturated fat like olive oil, or if it's a saturated fat like coconut oil or palm kernel oil. It's going to still be 9 calories per gram, either one. But there is a difference. So if you happen to pick up a product and it's like, oh, well, I'm trying to lower my cholesterol and my risk for heart disease, so this product has some olive oil in it, where this product over here has coconut oil or palm kernel oil in it. Well, the one with the olive oil is the better choice. Doesn't make it a healthy choice in of itself compared to an unprocessed whole food, but it's still the better choice between those two choices. Does that make sense? And so it's always better to buy foods that don't have added oil. We've talked a lot about oil, I know, in the class already, different classes, but so that's just something else to look for. Because if you're trying to lose weight, you want to avoid the calories from fat, right? Then which the oil is just 100% of the calories are from fat. So that's the way you can increase the calories in a food is by adding fat to it, especially oil because it's pure fat, and then adding sugar and oil. So adding sugar and oil increases the calories, but it doesn't really increase the satiety. It doesn't really increase the allowing it to help you feel full. Because if you think about it, when they process foods, they it's the whole. Have you guys seen the book in the back, The Sugar, Salt, Fat by Michael Moss? That's one of the really famous books. And what it shows is all the food companies, Kraft and Nabisco and all these food companies, they hire the smartest people that come out of the food science. So the food scientists, they figured out the bliss point, the mouth feel, the percent of calories from fat, sugar, salt, everything all together to make it addicting. And they actually do functional MRI, so they can test all these foods and pay people to do research, and they do functional MRI machines, and they feed people different combinations of food, and they see what lights the brain up the most. And so we have no chance, right? We have no chance whatsoever. So the whole idea about processing food, and then you're going to have some skills now reading food labels, but you have to know that the enemy is basically they're not trying to hurt you, they're just trying to sell more, right? They're just trying to make profit. And so everything is designed to work against you. And so they're going to have just the right amount of salt, sugar, fat, mouthfeel, chewiness, everything that's perfect, and so that you'll want more. Because these foods, like at McDonald's, you ever notice, like, I used to work there years ago. For 5 years I worked at a McDonald's, and back when I was bike racing and stuff in my teens, back in the late 80s. And if you've ever done this, I did it because I worked there for so long. I mean, you could take like, and it was like be a Big Mac or something that's old, like we're going to throw it away or whatever, and you could just grab it and crunch it up, and you can make it like in the palm of your hand. It's like it's so little food because it's just air, sugar, fat, salt, and so what they're trying to do is not make you feel full. It's like you like the taste, but you won't feel full, so that you'll eat more of it, so they make more money. So that's the whole design. They don't want you to eat a whole food plant-based diet because you're going to be full on such a larger volume of food, but it's so low in calories, so high in fiber and water, it's going to make you feel full. And so it's so cheap, right? So if you're eating food that they create, the processed and all that, they're trying to get you to eat much of it as you can. Like you can't, the chips, you can't eat just one or whatever, right? And so they're trying to make it that way, so you eat as much of it as possible, so you buy more. They don't want you to eat a few items, a few pieces of whatever they're selling you, and then, oh, I'm full, that's enough of that. They've designed it so that you eat more and more and more and more and buy more and more and all the time. And so that's why, using these skills, if you're following these rules, yeah, there are some processed foods that are not as bad as other ones. And I don't know if you guys saw some of the studies that came out. Dr. Neil Barnard brought light to them. I can't remember who actually did the studies that were really good, but they actually showed like even processed foods. So like they were showing which foods increase mortality and which foods decrease mortality. So mortality means death from any cause, all cause mortality. And they actually showed even foods like shredded wheat, and even I think even whole grain Cheerios were actually associated with lower mortality. And so some processed foods even were shown to actually decrease your risk of dying, decrease your risk of heart disease, decrease your risk of diabetes. And so obviously there's even better foods than the processed foods, right? Which you're learning in these classes, but there actually are processed foods that actually are associated with lower risk of death. And what actually the only foods on that study on that chart that they did that showed increased the more significant increased mortality were animal products, so meat and then processed meat. So it was actually specifically more processed meat than whole meat, like red meat. Or I mean, red meat was a little bit, chicken, fish was a little bit less, and then but processed meat was definitely highly associated with increased risk of death, mortality. And then sugar sweetened beverages was the other. So the two worst foods were processed meats like bacon, sausage, pepperoni, those kinds of things, lunch meats, hot dogs, and then sugar sweetened beverages. Those were the two worst. But so pretty interesting. So we're not telling you should eat more Cheerios, but if you were choosing between bacon and eggs for breakfast and some Cheerios with some fruit on it, that's still the Cheerios with the fruit on it still a better choice than the bacon and eggs, for example, right? And so I just want to give that, yeah, in the back there. Yeah. Yeah, I've seen that movie, with Matthew Broderick, where he was at the Kellogg place where Kellogg they were doing like coffee enemas and all these different things. But as far as, yeah, I don't know the history of, I mean, that they talk a little bit about the history of Kellogg in that movie, but I don't know as far as making foods bland on purpose. I didn't know about that. I do know that Dennis Burkett worked with Kellogg. And so Burkett's lymphoma is named after him. And I have a video on the website about Dennis Burkett, interviewed by Dr. John McDougall back in the 80s. And so he was considered the fiber man. So he was a general surgeon. He did a medical missionary in Uganda for 20 plus years. And he was the minister of health, and he oversaw a bunch of hospitals. And they would go around to different villages in Uganda and evaluate their stools. And kind of the mnemonic was, or the little graphic that he created was, the bigger the pile of poop in a village, the smaller the hospital you needed. The smaller the pile of poop, the bigger hospital you needed. So the more fiber people ate from whole plant foods, the healthier they were. And what was amazing, when they would go around these villages, people could poop on demand. So they would just go up to a villager and say, "Hey, can I get a stool sample?" And just go, because they eat so much fiber, they could just do that anytime. And so pretty interesting. But so anyway, back to Dennis Burkett, is that he actually worked with the millers in the United States. So he was from Britain, but he worked with the millers in the United States, and he was able to get them to add fiber, take less of the fiber and nutrients out of the flour. And so he was responsible for that. And so some of the cereals where they started adding fiber was because of Dennis Burkett, Dr. Burkett. And so, but he was a little bit off. It was his being a surgeon, I guess, his ideology was a little bit too reductionist, because he thought it was just the fiber. It's got to be just the fiber. So if we do Metamucil and add fiber to the food, people will get healthy. And that's not quite right. I mean, the fiber is a big part of it, but it's the food that contains the fiber that's important. So it's not the fiber itself, because if you take a fiber supplement, you don't get the same health benefits as if you get the fiber from the whole plant food. So, but yeah. So we kind of covered those. Before it gets too late, I want to show you. So, Ed, go to the handouts from class on the class website. And I'm just going to point out a couple of handouts on there. So you'll see this little section here, how to read food labels without being tricked. You don't have to click on any of them, but if you were to click on that at home, it's an article, 4 or 5 page article, and it goes over some of the things we went over here, and it gives you a lot more information. So that's one thing. And then the how to read a food label is this one here. So you already have that. And then new and improved nutrition facts label key changes. You can look at that if you want, if you're interested in what I was talking about earlier with what was on the old food label, what's on the new food label. And it kind of gives you an example, a real food label example of applying some of these rules you can look at if you want to reference that. And then the label reading practice assignment, that was from Debbie Coulthard, who did this class in the past. It's kind of an assignment she created, and so that's on there. So if you wanted to print that out, you could go on there, and it, basically you would just take any food label that you have in your house, if you have any, and then just go through, and it has you write out all the things you learned here, and you can practice basically. So I know in the her class in the past, she had a bunch of food labels, and we kind of got in small groups and tried it, which we could, we could have done, but I wanted to kind of give her just a more basic example of that, and then you can do that, do that on your own, at your own pace too. But so that's what I had for this. Any further questions about food, any of the stuff we covered? Any other questions? Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So the question is, yeah. Yeah. So basically, the question is, when you look at the food label and the first few ingredients you might recognize, and then the ones you don't recognize, what happens to all those? And we don't really know. I mean, Debbie's last class, she talked about, that generally recognized as safe is a term that the food industry uses, and there's thousands and thousands of chemicals that are reasonably thought to be reasonably safe, but we don't really know. And she was saying it's probably we don't know, and that's absolutely true. We know that we think that a lot of these preservatives and things that are in food, a lot of the items that are in the American food supply label and that the industry uses to process and package food is complete. They're allowed here, but not in Europe, not in other countries. So if I saw a comparison recently of an instant oatmeal. It was like, I think it was maple brown sugar Quaker instant oatmeal, which, if you look at the American food label and the ingredients list, it's horrible. It's tons of sugar, tons of chemicals. You don't recognize what is all this. And then you look at the one that the exact same product, Quaker maple brown sugar instant oatmeal that they sell in the UK. And it's like 4 or 5 ingredients. It doesn't have a bunch of added sugar in it. It doesn't have all those preservatives. It's like, well, why are they doing that? I mean, why do they get to put all that crap in ours and not in theirs? And it's like, and you'd think it would be more expensive. I mean, your logic would be, well, isn't it more expensive to put all those extra ingredients in? Apparently not. And because of that, you get less of the product, and it has a longer shelf life, and so they get more profit out of it. And it's like, so that because they've outlawed a lot of those preservatives in other countries, but they don't here. And so yeah, and I think a lot of those processed chemicals, preservatives, they're we don't really have good studies to know cause and effect, but we know we have a lot of strong associations over and over and over that it's related to why it's a contributor to why we have such an obesity problem, because some of those chemicals are what we call obesogenic. They actually make it harder to burn fat, makes it easier to store fat. And so some of these chemicals we know and maybe are related to cancer, increases in cancer and different things. Yeah. Well, you want the question is about fat. So we don't need any isolated fat in our diet. We don't need any kind of oil. So we don't need fish oil. We don't need olive oil. We don't need any processed oil because we have no need. So the best way to get protein, best way to get carbohydrate, the best way to get fat, those are our 3 macronutrients. Those are our macro means we need a lot. Macro's big. So that's where we get all our calories is carbohydrate, protein, and fat. And so the best way to get all three of those macronutrients is from a whole food. So the best way to get your fat is from eating the plants. So the avocados, the nuts and the seeds, the all the whole plant foods. And so you don't actually, the problem with getting a little extra omega-3 from eating fish is you don't just get to eat omega-3 in isolation. You're also going to get the saturated fat, the cholesterol, the microplastics, the methyl mercury, the dioxins. So it comes as a package deal. You can't just eat fat unless you just eat oil. And so, and we don't need that. We have no need for all that extra fat. And so if you're eating, like we were talking about earlier, a whole food plant-based diet, no animal products, no added oils, you're still getting 10 to 15% of your calories every day from fat, which is plenty for good brain health and everything else. There are some studies in some cases where people don't have necessarily an ideal omega-3 to 6 ratio. And so omega-3 and omega-6 are our essential fatty acids, which we have to get those from our diet. We don't make them naturally. And so the short chain fatty acids, omega-3, those are the ALA, which is from your chia seeds, your flax seeds, your walnuts, things like that. And then our body converts the short chain ALA into the long chain omega-3, which is the one we know is the healthiest and good for brain health and stuff like that. And that's EPA and DHA is what those are. And so our body will convert the short chain to the long chain. But what we do know is that omega-6 inhibits the ability of our body to convert the short chain to the long chain. And so if you're eating a lot of omega-6, which is, comes in a lot of the oils and the processed foods, so if you're eating chips, cookies, crackers, all the oils that are added to processed foods, those are really high in omega-6, and that suppresses your ability to transfer short chain to long chain, which is why we say, okay, maybe you could take a supplement, which is a DHA EPA supplement, eat the sea vegetables because they're naturally high in the EPA, DHA. And so, but there's some debate about whether you should do the supplements. There are some even in the plant-based community that advocate for the supplements, DHA, EPA, because they see patients in clinic where their ratio isn't so great and their EPA, DHA, long chain omega-3 is not optimal. And so they recommend the supplement. But with supplements, we have studies that show it decreases your immune system slightly, which isn't good. It actually increases blood thinning, so you could bleed. If you fell down and hurt yourself, and you could bleed out. And then the third, more recent one is it's actually associated with a higher risk for atrial fibrillation. And so I'm on the fence where, I'm not going to take a EPA DHA supplement, but I try to keep my omega-6 low, eat lots of walnuts and flax seeds and chia seeds and all that. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Yeah. Right. Mm. Yeah. And so he's talking about commenting on, social disparities. And so I work at community health centers in Lane County. So a pretty fair percentage of my patients are unhoused. They live in their cars, they live in camps, or they depend on food pantries and things like that. So a lot of food insecure people, and that's a lot of my patients. And so kind of think what point he's bringing up is, you kind of have to make the best choices with what you have on hand. And so, you're going to be somewhat limited by what the choices are. If they're going to, if it's beans that are in a can, just, they're going to have a little extra salt if you look at the label. So just kind of rinse those. You can do frozen vegetables, SNAP benefits and stuff. You still can get, produce and stuff like that. But, there's not always going to be the most ideal choices, and which is why, our group is actually working with some of the food, like what used to be 86 Hunger, Pay It Forward. There's pantries around, and we've made connections with some of the food banks around town, trying to educate them, and they're trying to get healthier foods in. But it's not going to always be the best choices, like macaroni and cheese in a box and things like that. So people have to do what they can do. But I think it starts with education, and then trying to get the choices, because eating a plant-based diet can be really cheap, actually. So if you're just going to like Winco and just shopping in the produce section, the bulk bin, so you're doing dried beans, dried grains in the bulk section, you're doing produce. That's actually cheaper than eating meat and dairy and eggs and processed foods. You're going to actually save money by doing that, and studies have shown that actually eating the type of more plant-based diet we're recommending is actually cheaper. But if you're going to vegan restaurants and buying a lot of convenience processed vegan foods and convenience foods, that's where you start spending a lot of money, is with that stuff. So, but it is still an issue. Usually cook, like, well, you can go to Catholic Community Services, you can go to the Mission, they have food there. But yeah, a lot of them, they can't store, like some of the people that I have, patients that live in a fifth wheeler, or 12-foot trailer or whatever. They're not gonna, they can still, like a hot plate or something, they can cook a little bit, but they don't have a lot of storage space, so they can't like store up a bunch of produce or frozen foods and stuff, kind of the ideal that most people can usually do. Yeah. Mm. Yeah, a lot of people don't. Yeah. Hmm. Sure. Yeah, it's a whole. Mhm. Yeah, that's good. Yeah, food disparities is a whole topic. Yeah. Yeah. Buying their groceries at the dollar store. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Any other questions? Next week, as you heard, Pam is going to do. It's all so. Actually, she'll talk about the social connection pillar. Actually, changed. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine upgraded their social connection pillar. Now it's actually called connectedness. So it's being connected with yourself, with others, and with the world. And so spiritual and environmental, and so it's much more diverse now. And I sent it to her when I learned about it on the American College of Lifestyle Medicine website, and when I showed it to her, and it's like, wow, it's stuff you already kind of have talked about at your previous talks. And so she's a psychologist, retired psychiatry or psychology professor at the University of Oregon, and she actually taught my son. He got a psychology degree at U of O, and he had her for 2 classes, so it was pretty cool when we ran into her, and she's on our board now and member of our group. So I hope you come next week for her talk. So she'll talk a lot about the mental health and importance of connection and connectedness and all that. Yeah. Well, there's not, because the grams of because there's not really a part of the food label you need to worry about. So when we do our nutritional myths class here later on, I think it's in a couple weeks or 2 or 3 weeks, we'll talk a lot about protein and maybe getting enough and all that. But it's not a nutrient of concern. It's just a good marketing tool. And so if you get enough, no, I mean, you don't need to pay it. I mean, if you're counting, like if you're like, oh, my doctor or somebody said I should get 75 grams or 80 grams of protein a day, like especially people that are on GLP-1s, if you're on like the Ozempic and some of those drugs, you actually lose more lean muscle mass. And so you got to really, and if your appetite's suppressed, you couldn't be eating less, you probably are eating less calories because your appetite has been suppressed by the drug. And then so you really have to work hard resistance exercise to maintain your muscle mass, because what the GLP-1s have shown is that you lose. So if you lose weight with just diet and exercise, you lose, a certain percent of fat, certain percent of lean body muscle mass. But when you do it with the GLP-1s, you actually lose less fat, more lean muscle mass than losing weight the natural way. And so and they know that, and we know that as a medical profession. And so anyone that's on a GLP-1, we got to really make sure they're getting good quality food. They're not eating a lot of processed food. They're getting, so that they are getting enough calories and thus getting enough protein, because just eating more protein doesn't build muscle. You have to do the resistance exercise. You got to load those muscles to maintain and build muscle. And so it's not really it's not about the protein. You want to be getting enough, and as long as you're eating enough calories, you'll get enough protein. And we'll go much more in depth on that when we do the nutritional myths class. Do you have anything you want to add?
Let's just sum up real quickly. Where What do you think about food level labels in terms of when you go to the grocery store the next time? Are you going to be searching them out with a passion? Or are you going to be avoiding them with a passion? This is a choice that you get to make. And you can spend a lot of time focusing on how much fat, how much this, that. But the bottom line is, healthiest way to shop is how? You walk down the fruit, vegetable aisles. Do they have labels? No labels. You could go to the bins, beans, rice, oats, quinoa. Do they have labels generally? Sometimes they do, but most of the time you don't need labels for those. So that's what I want to encourage you to think about. Focus on getting foods that you can pull off a tree, pick off a tree, pull out of the ground, or harvest and eat them in their whole food, not highly processed. And then you won't have to worry too much about the labeling. And the last thing I want to say is sodium. Where are you getting most of your salt, which is a #1 killer in the world? Are you getting it from your salt shaker? Yes. So when you go out to eat, you need to be focusing on the salt content. And when you're buying foods with labels, the processing. So if you're having trouble with high blood pressure, you want to avoid eating too much salt, focus on foods is grown in nature that don't have the labels, and be careful about eating out. Thank you.
All right. All right. Hope you guys come next week. Thank you. Out the website for the other to practice and in the comfort of your home there. Fresh.
I